Stand by.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and today we have a chance to take a look at this really amazing Walther WA-2000 sniper rifle. And this truly is a legit sniper rifle, or at least that's what it was designed for. The genesis of this rifle goes back to the early 1970s, specifically 1972, with the Munich massacre at the Munich Olympics. It was a horrible tragedy. And among other things, it kind of revealed that the German government didn't have any sort of counter-terrorist response capability. They really kind of had an ad hoc police response to this incident. And in its aftermath, they looked at really formalizing something. We would see this become like GSG-9 and then spread all over the world with other governments establishing these elite small counter-terrorist response units. Well, the Walther company set about designing a sniper rifle specifically for this sort of police counter-terrorist use. This wasn't really developed with the intention of military contracts. There are a whole bunch of aspects of it that just aren't really compatible with a military, but they are compatible with a police use. In 1976, this was actually adopted by some West German police units. But that's pretty much it. In total, I believe 176 of these rifles were ever made. They never quite, didn't really actually go into mass production. Serial production, yes, but as you'll see when we take this apart, there's still some elements to this rifle that would really ought to be simplified and changed if it were to be adopted on a very large scale. Now, of these guns, there are actually two different models. There's a first model and a second model. This is a second model gun, which we can distinguish by its flash hider looking flash hider. The first model had this kind of can-shaped attachment on the muzzle. And what they did with the second model was really iron out some of the problems that were in the gas system. So I guess I should say, for folks who don't know, this is a semi-automatic rifle. It is chambered for 300 Winchester Magnum. These were originally available, the first models were available in 300 Winchester Magnum and 7.5x55 Swiss, as well as 7.62 NATO. The second model, I believe they dropped the Swiss cartridge, so it was just 308 or 7.62 NATO and 300 Win Mag. Magazine holds 6 rounds, and it's a short stroke gas piston. So we'll take it apart in a moment and get a closer look at that. But a few of the other elements to point out here are, of course, a forward-mounted bipod. This looks like a very futuristic rifle, but when we start looking at it up close, you'll see maybe it actually isn't. So let's bring the camera in and go ahead and do that. All right, so markings on this are pretty straightforward and simple. We have a Walther banner, WA2000 model. It does note on the right side that it's made in Germany. And then just in front of the ejection port, we have another Walther banner. Note that this is a separate component. This is one side plate. This is a separate side plate. We have our German proof marks. Serial number on this rifle is 1099. I believe the second pattern of these guns, they started the serial numbers at 1000. We do also have a serial number matching, of course, on the bolt. And then the left side of the gun mirrors a couple of these markings, the Walther banner and the WA2000. Lastly, we have an import mark here. Interarms of Alexandria, Virginia was a major importer of Walther products in general, or Walther products in specific, and everything interesting in military in general. All right, so as I mentioned, this is the second pattern's flash hider, which is just a perfectly functional flash hider. Now, if we take a look at the front of this, you'll see, interestingly, and this took me by surprise, this is not a free-floated barrel. In many ways, this rifle is kind of the first generation of really high-performance sniper rifles, and a lot of the elements that we would think of today as being obvious, well, maybe they weren't so obvious, and they weren't integrated here. So in lieu of this being free-floated, it's actually very tightly fixed. The way this rifle is built is basically with an upper and a lower rail, and side plates and everything clamped together into one very rigid assembly. So you'll see the bipod here is mounted to the top rail. These legs are non-adjustable, but they do fold up. So if I pull the bipod leg down, there we go. I can lift these up like that. And then there's a button here on the bipod itself. You can push that, and that allows me to slide it down the rail, and I can lock it into place at either the front or the back. And the bipod legs are usable from either position. Now on this side, we have the front sling attachment. We'll get to this in a minute. That's a funky, interesting setup. We have our gas block and gas system right here. The barrel is 26 inches overall length. It is, of course, a bullpup action, so the action is all the way behind the trigger, and that's why it has such a short barrel sticking out the front. Charging handle, non-reciprocating charging handle. Safety is right here. The safety, interestingly, is completely ambidextrous, while the rifle is completely not ambidextrous. It just has a very short throw. We're on fire right now. That's safe. That's fire. The indicator is just which of these lines is matched up with its corresponding button. By the way, to put a little bit of this in context, the retail price on this rifle in 1988 was $9,000. So these were incredibly expensive guns at the period, and that's part of why they weren't adopted widely. Moving back, we have a pair of side plates covering the action. Wood furniture, a little bit of a curious thing, I guess more suited for a police gun than a military one. The palm rest here on the other side of the grip is adjustable. You can loosen this, move it up and down, and rotate it like a target rifle. This is an interesting setup. You could grip this with the back of your hand, but it's actually more designed for the crook of your non-shooting arm, like this. We'll touch on that when we do some shooting with this, but that's why you have this interesting design back there. The butt plate is adjustable up and down, kind of like the cheek or the palm rest there. And then we also have a very much a target style trigger. The face of the trigger is flat. It's actually a really good trigger pull. One of the nice things about this being an early generation sniper rifle is they knew a good trigger pull was important, but they hadn't gone to this, kind of ludicrous extent of, 2-ounce triggers that you do occasionally see people trying to create today. So, these can, of course, mount pretty much any scope that you want, but the scope that was typically included with them was a 2.5 to 10 power Schmidt and Bender. And again, it's an interesting look at the very early generation of sniper rifles in that the glass is fantastic. It's a very good scope, but it has an extremely simple reticle. The reticle is simply a crosshair, thick lines on the outside and thin lines on the inside. There's no ranging, there's no mil dot, there's no nothing, just a plain crosshair. In fact, it's not even a German post style of reticle. The magazine holds 6 rounds and of course is located behind the trigger because this is a bullpup. The magazine release is this button right at the back. I can push that in, pull out the magazine. In fact, we have a caliber marking there on that side. And one aspect of this that they absolutely did right as a target rifle is there's very little angle between the magazine, the cartridge in the magazine at the top, and the chamber. So when you're feeding a cartridge, there's very little risk of scratching the bullet or bending the bullet in the case or otherwise changing it in some way that would impair your accuracy. The scope is attached not through a Picatinny rail or anything quite like that, but rather just a clamp-on dovetail. And the scope itself is bolted to the top rail of the gun, which is only second-hand connected to the barrel. On a rifle like this that was being built today, you would absolutely have the scope directly connected to the barrel to give the best possible accuracy. So Walther did the early R&D on guns like this, I think is probably the best way to put it. And as I said, a lot of the ideas, a lot of the concepts that we consider obvious and self-evident today weren't so much in the early 70s. So field stripping this is not the simplest thing ever, but it can be done, and I'll show you how to do it here. I should say, a field strip of this gun means you take the bolt out. That's it. Anything further than that requires a screwdriver and major parts disassembly. We'll do that too, but to field strip it, the first thing we're going to do is rotate the butt plate over, and we do that by pulling this button and then rotating, pulling this button all the way. There we go. Then I can rotate the butt plate off of its catch here, and it just kind of hangs on this peg. Next, we can take the cheek rest off. It's got a couple of keyed pegs that hold it on right there. With that off, now we have access here to the other side. By the way, just because there is a cutout on this side of the receiver, this does not mean that this gun is interchangeable left to right-handed. It is not. This is just access for dealing with stuff. Now, I have two pins right here. And what these are doing is actually connecting the gas piston block to the connecting rods that attach to the bolt. So I'm going to push this pin in and slide that connecting rod slightly off center. Now I have a matching one over here, which will do the same thing too. Then we can grab the bolt, slide the bolt towards the back. However, there is another piece that we have to deal with. This lever right here, I have to push up like that in order to let the bolt come out. There we go. All right. There we go. Bolt sits on these two rails. So now these are unconnected to anything. And you can see the notch there rides in the base of the bolt here. The bolt itself is a 7-lug rotating affair. So that is the unlocked position. When the bolt closes, there's a cam pin in here, forces it to rotate, locks shut. The multiple locking lugs are there both because its 300 Winchester Magnum is a pretty strong round, and also because having a whole bunch of locking lugs gives you a more precise and repeatable lockup, thus improving accuracy. We have a sliding dust cover here on the side. That just keeps the ejection port covered up when the bolt's traveling and in battery. All right, and that's field stripped. That's it. All right, now to disassemble the gun a little farther so that we can see exactly what's happening on the inside, or see more of it. First thing we have to do is actually take off the wooden handguard. There's a hex head screw down there. Now, before we go further, I want to point out that screw doesn't screw into this lower rail. It actually screws into a locking block that slides inside that lower rail. So you can see it right there, but I can also take it and move it, and it's not connected to anything. And if I then continue to take the gun apart, I will inevitably slide that little block somewhere inside the rail. So when you go to put the handguard back on, you have to wiggle that block right up into that screw hole. All right, but moving on. The next step is to take off this side plate, which requires removing these 5 screws. This whole rifle is kind of built on the rail and plate amalgamation sort of theory. If you look here at the back end, you can see we have another side plate that screws on. But for our purposes, we're just going to take off this front one with the charging handle. So this lifts off. There's another one of our little washers. The charging handle has this metal spring that locks it in the forward position. If you want to take it out, you bring it back to this position and it will drop out. There's that. Simple side plate. I mean, it really is just a metal plate with all the appropriate elements relieved. Now, inside, we can see what's actually going on. We have a gas port in the barrel here. This is our gas block. It is adjustable here, but this is not the sort of thing you're going to adjust very often. You're going to set it once and then be done with it. And then the gas piston is right there. So that will move just slightly back, kind of like a gas tappet system. It will hit this block. That block is normally going to be connected to this rail. So the little spring button that I had to depress to disassemble it was that, which connects through this hole, and then all the way back here to where it attaches to the bolt, which it isn't going to at the moment, but you see how that works. So tap it, hits this block goes backwards against its recoil spring right there. These pins lock into these connecting arms. This connecting arm connects to the bolt, hence the bolt moves. You can see the barrel. We have our castle nut for the barrel back here. This is where it's connected to its rear trunnion, and then its front trunnion is basically this. This is like an H block that connects the barrel rigidly to the upper and the lower rails of the gun. This is kind of one of those weird guns, you know, in some ways it's actually like a Jaeger pistol, where there isn't necessarily truly a single receiver. There's a compilation of parts that go together to make a rigid gun. All right, I said we would take a look at the Sling. This is the Sling. It is a backpack style of sling, which is kind of slick. We've got this mounting lug on the front and this hook here. And what we're going to do is, goes this way. That goes over the top. Pin goes in the hole right there. And then we tighten that up. Then we take the back end here, which has a typical sort of quick detach sling mount, and that goes right there. There we go. And there you have two backpack straps, a nice padded thing here, so that this sits just a little bit up off your back. Very handy for police, honestly, very handy for police counter-terror or counterinsurgency sort of stuff. Now these, I mentioned these were produced, the development started in the, 1972. These were ultimately produced until 1988. Less than 200 made. I believe the total was 176. Of those, only a very small number came into the United States. So kind of, I would say this qualifies as exquisitely rare to find here these days. So we're going to go out and do a little bit of shooting with it. And then if you're really interested in the shooting and the comparison and the practical applications of this rifle, definitely check out the other video we're posting on InRange TV today, where we're doing like Eastern Front 1986. We're going to compare this rifle to an SVD Dragunov and see how the two of them shape up on the timer in the field. Alrighty, let's try a little bit of shooting. Nope. One more.
That was dead center.
That was a nice hit. 300 meters. This thing's pretty darn light recoiling for a 300 Win Mag. And I'm shooting it right-handed because it is a bullpup. I think I could shoot this left-handed. The rifle's owner has told me that they shoot it left-handed, and just makes me a little nervous, so I'm shooting it right-handed the way it was quote-unquote supposed to be done. It's kind of interesting that a lot of this is not adjustable. The height of the butt pad is, the cheek rest is not, and the cheek rest is a little bit high for my taste, or my facial geometry, however you want to look at it. It's a very pleasant gun to shoot, though. It's very stable in position. All right, let's see if we can get the 200-meter target a couple more times. That was a hit. That was a hit. This thing's really quite easy to hit with. All right, the one other thing I think we need to do is put a group on paper, because that's what this rifle is all about. So the proper way to do that would be to hand load for this specific individual rifle and tune a load just right. But of course, I don't have the time available or the access to the gun on a long enough basis to do that. So we're doing the very next best thing, which is Black Hills 190 to grain match 300 Win Mag. Black Hills is probably about as good as you can get for precision ammo that you haven't actually hand loaded precisely to your own rifle. So a big thank you to Black Hills for providing us this. It's fantastic ammo, and it should allow us to wring the best performance out of the Walther 2000. Woo! All right, we'll go take a look at how that went. Now, we did have one kind of weird malfunction there, a failure to fully eject. We said this isn't a military rifle, and if something goes wrong with it, you kind of just put it down and find something else. But let's see how the target is. All right, so there is my fantastic 5-round group of just slightly under 3 inches at 100 meters, which is kind of pretty pathetic. Well, that pathetic group really leaves a lot to be desired. We need someone who's a better shooter, like my friend Carl, to do a group with this rifle to really see what it's capable of. So I think I can tell you about the history, I can show you the disassembly and show you how this works, but it really leaves open some remaining questions about the practicality of the Walther 2000 compared to some other sniper rifles of this vintage, like the Dragunov here. So I think what we are going to go ahead and do is a second video over on InRange TV, where we're going to directly address the practical application of the Walther 2000. And we're going to do that with both groups from Carl and an on-the-clock timed benchmark test of the WA2000 versus the SVD Dragunov. That should be really cool. And that's the sort of thing that I'm just not a good enough shooter to provide you with here on Forgotten Weapons. So if you're interested in more about the Walther 2000, definitely head over to InRange TV. Check out that video, which posted up on the same day as this one. And of course, subscribe over there as well as Forgotten Weapons, because we have more really cool footage on all sorts of interesting guns like these coming up. Thanks for watching.